Sure. So 1946, the mistranslation that shifted culture is about the first time the word homosexual appeared in the Bible. And we have the evidence that it's a mistranslation. And as you can imagine, if you've ever had the Bible used as a weapon against you, which unfortunately the church and the Bible has used the Bible against countless groups to marginalize groups and uplift others. And so this story just happens to talk about one of those others, the LGBTQ community that the church has been excluding based on verses. So being a queer person who grew up in the church and would identify as a gay Christian, having this struggle my whole life, trying to reconcile my faith, my sexuality, but also the affirmation of my parents. And after 46 years tomorrow, can you believe it? Once I learned of this mistranslation, it's so important. I felt it would have been irresponsible of me not to make this movie. This isn't my opinion. This isn't my feelings. This isn't my biblical interpretation. It's an indisputable fact that the Bible was mistranslated. We have the evidence, and we can show through the data where the mistake happened, what those men did about it, how the word spread to other translations, and when it became malice, and which group started to use the Bible as a weapon against our community. So that's why I made this film. It's an impact film that was designed to edify, but also impact, which means change. So after this theatrical release, the goal would be real change in our society that helps both parties in this generational mistranslation, this generational problem.
Well, it's a very personal problem. This generation problem. It's your relationship with your dad is at the center of this movie. Can you talk about that? Who is your dad? Why is he?
My dad, his birthday is tomorrow too. We share a birthday, and he's very special. And I'm so grateful that he was a part of the film. And he would say and has said that he is grateful that he had an opportunity to show his voice. But what we were looking to do with the film, since it is a little bit heady, a little bit academic, there's this journalistic and then this journey approach, we wanted to contextualize the issue and show how it plays out in real life. We didn't know that my dad would commit it first. And so we were interviewing other subject matters to see how we can show an example to really get with the heart matter of this head issue. And once my dad signed on, we knew that was the direction. I mean, if you look at, no spoiler alerts, the archive footage of us in the early 2000s, when I first outed my father for having a lesbian daughter, see how I did that little reverse there. And we started to deal with this issue publicly, and he had to then deal with it publicly. And so it just fit naturally. It also afforded us an opportunity to use the filmmaking process as a way to include the audience. So we broke the fourth wall right away. We're on this journey together. Come with me. I'm a filmmaker, and this is how I'm going to tell this story. But then I was also able to narrate. So it worked out well. I'm glad my dad said yes. And hopefully people will respond with a vulnerability in our challenging relationship.
The issue here is that the mistranslation of the Bible was that the word homosexuality and homosexual were replaced in 1946, right? They got interjected into the Bible. What were the words before the change?
Prior to that, in the King James Version, which was the most popular, which was published in 1611, the verse read, "Abusers of themselves with mankind." So even King James understood, who, spoiler alert, was bisexual or homosexual, even though they wouldn't have used those language, but he definitely loved men, and that was no secret. But he knew that this was about abuse, exploitation, and not necessarily what was mistranslated, which is homosexual. The original Greek is malakoi and arsenokoitai, and that is, it could be translated as man and man sex, but really what kind of sex is going on? And so the new revised standard updated edition, which just came out in 2022, does a great job in saying illicit sex amongst men and then male prostitution, which makes and forces the reader to think a little bit more than just a general term like homosexual. But what happened is the Malakoi would be the passive participant in the sex act, which may or may not be consensual, which is not usually something that they want. If it's like a slave situation, they might be doing it because they have to do it, but it's usually slave, prostitution, temple prostitution, pederasty, which was sex with young boys, or to put it crassly, if you were a man of power, you could penetrate anything you wanted as long as they were of lesser value to you. And that means child, slave, enslaved person, a woman, but they would mostly do this to the young boys because they didn't want to spoil the girls, because the girls needed to be virgins when they were married off. Anyway, don't get me started. Abusers themselves with mankind, to answer your question, but because the passive participant is the Malakoi, the arsenokoitai is the active participant. So that's the person who's doing the penetrating. Sex was something you used to do to somebody, not with somebody. And so that's the mindset and the thinking. And what St. Paul was doing was condemning people using their power over other people to control, to manipulate. It's a power thing. It's all about power and exploitation. And these are the themes that are consistent if you look at the translations over varying years, and also in other languages, where the German translates it as Knabenschänder, which means boy molester. Or the Norwegian, I don't know the term, Ed would know the term, but it means a specific age group of boys from ages 8 to 11. It's a very specific term that generates to a specific age group of young boys. And so it's very interesting when you look at the variations. And as Trevor Thompson, one of our scholars, says in the film, when you notice that there's variations within the text and there's complication there, it's not as easy, it's not as black and white as, the term homosexual.
This was in 1946. When did this new interpretation of the Bible, when did it start to get weaponized against gay people, against LGBTQ people?
We don't see malice in the data until the 80s. Even in the 70s, it's still assumptions. What happened was in 1959, when David wrote the letter to the head of the translation committee, it was 2 weeks before the cutoff, where the committee couldn't make any other additions, revisions for another 10 years. They were in a locked contract with their publisher. So from 1959 to 1960, when they picked up their revision, that's just the revised standard version, the letters sat there in a vault where the head of the translation committee said, "We see your point. We see that this is wrong. We'll address it when we reconvene." They reconvened. They voted 7-3 to take the word homosexual out, and they put in sexual perverts, which is still a problematic translation, but that's another story. The problem is that the 3 other modern English translation committees in the 70s wanted to make their version of the English Bible for various reasons. 1, it's very lucrative. 2, you can control certain groups in the ways that you put together a Bible translation and the way that you use the English. And all 3 of these groups use the Revised Standard Version as their root text. And they all use the word homosexual, but then started to plug it into different places where it just didn't belong. That's where it spread to 6 different verses. But we don't see malice until Jerry Falwell and the moral majority, who then weaponized it and politicized it. And it's very clear in the example that we have in the film, where that's pure propaganda. There's no other way to look at it. And it's a shame that people who claim to follow Christ use the Bible in that way to uplift their identity politics, to uplift their people group and their political power. And, it's all about power and structure.
Phyllis, who are the main players in your film? You have some really, really interesting characters in there besides yourself and your dad.
Yeah. So, excuse me. The main characters are Ed and Kathy, and Ed and Kathy and David too. We can talk about David. We've got some amazing characters in our film, and these are obviously real life people that, and lay people that have just done amazing things because they asked the question and they did the work. And so Kathy Baldock is a ally in the LGBTQ community that doesn't really know gay people, but ended up doing relationship with a gay person and was like, I love my friend. Wait a minute, why couldn't God love my friend? And just really started to ask the questions. So she was the one that discovered the 1946 team RSV, put the word in. She knew every member of the team. She started doing work. She started talking about it. Then at Oxford, who's a gay Christian in 2014, heard one of Kathy's talks and was like, I don't believe that. The word homosexual, not until 46. So he started buying old Bibles, lexicons, dictionaries to get to the bottom of this. And because he had this sexy book collection, he was able to woo Kathy over to be friends and start working together. And then the two of them, it was Ed that discovered that the archives were at Yale University. So he contacted Yale. They went in 2017. They shot all of that footage on their iPhone. You like my tagging there? Look at this, shameless. And filmed all that stuff. So when I got that footage, you can imagine, I was like, this is cinema gold. You guys were reading the letters and they shot it in the right frame. I was like, it's divine intervention, you know, but they're amazing characters. They're just funny and real and genuine and authentic and vulnerable. And Neto in there as well, the friendship with Kathy, but David, who wrote the letter, who is a retired minister. He died in January 2023, but he did get to see the movie, and we love David so much and have built quite a relationship with him over his last years. But he was the one who wrote the letter as a 21-year-old seminary student. And he wrote a very academic letter, very impressive, with an addendum. He spent 8 months researching to put the letter together before he sent it out, and then challenged the translation committee because he's like, this is wrong. And he was right. He was definitely ahead of his time. And we got to meet him in his 80s, a retired United Church of Canada pastor who finally was able to come out. Can you imagine being in the 50s, first thinking you're the only queer person in the world, then answering the call and knowing that you can't talk about a certain part of your identity that is very real. So when you think about it, in the word homosexual being in the Bible, you could be a homosexual and have never engaged in a sex act. Just to even get to that basic outline, and people today would be like, homosexual is just sin no matter what. So that's where his challenge came from, an authentic place, and it's just an amazing story. So as soon as I first heard about the mistranslation, I was in that seminar with my mom and dad, which you see in the film. That was the first time I learned about the mistranslation, because I had only binge watched Kathy and learned of her other work. And I was like, this is fascinating. And my parents were in town. So I was like, I'm just going to put everybody together in a room and film. So it literally just happened that way. So I was learning about it at the same time my dad was. Obviously, we went down different paths. And I was compelled, I have to tell this story. Again, it's not my opinion. It's not my feelings. This is an indisputable fact. These characters are amazing. David is alive. I have to do this. And so the rest is history. That was 5 years ago, October 2018.
Wow. I'm curious, how do people react to your film when they find out about this? I'm sure people who are watching your movies don't know the history of it. They're watching it for the first time. How do they react? Gay people who find out that this has all been a mistranslation?
We get a lot of different responses. Most of it is positive. People who are queer, LGBTQ, and have had a religious background will come up and say things like they're in a transformative state because there's this click in their brain where they still were holding on to the belief that being gay is a sin because it's so ingrained in our culture. And they watch the movie and they're like, I never even thought that it couldn't be a sin, that it wasn't a sin, that it isn't a sin. And you can just see the freedom in their face. And then for a straight person who is cisgender, heterosexual, and would also fall into this idea that being queer is a sin, will watch the film and recognize the new information, recognize this, and I can see then their head and their heart aligning, because a lot of people, I think, really, for me, even growing up in the church, not knowing what really being LGBTQ was, or really knowing that I was queer, but hearing how the culture and how the church would talk about homosexuals, those dirty, filthy homosexuals. And we all remember Anita Bryant, who, right. And so it just was there. And I'm like, this doesn't feel right. There's just something not right about it. And that's why I felt it would have been irresponsible of me not to make this movie, because we have an opportunity to make it right. And that's why Ed went out and bought all those books, because we have an opportunity to make it right. And Kathy just wants to be friends with her friend Netto and go on lesbian camping trips and, love queer people. It's a great story.
Now, your dad's a minister, and he's confronted with this many times in your movie, but he's not sold.
He will not sway. No, he's very strong in his convictions. But to that end, he has changed a bit. And so one of the messages in the film is, we're not going to agree on everything. And most people have a Sal example in their life where you just don't agree, but how are you doing relationship? How are you handling communication and boundaries and still being able to be in relationship? Because the only way to be an influence is to be in relationship. And my dad taught me that, and he's still working on me, and he still hopes I have my Damascus moment and I see the light and Jesus shows me the way. And Dad, I hope the same for you, and so it's a very interesting relationship. But I've seen him change in the sense where, when we first started this journey, when he wrote me the letter, he really genuinely was concerned for my eternal soul, because he felt that gay people just don't inherit the kingdom of God, just like it says in the word right there. And so in that sense, just even being homosexual will separate you from the kingdom of God. And guess what? That's what happened to me. I was separated from my family. And so now he would understand and think this would be like a side B perspective, where we're all born with something, like you can be gay, but you just can't act on it. And the thinking is, we all have to set aside something and pick up our cross, and yours just happens to be same-sex attraction. And so, sorry, your choices are celibacy or getting in a mixed orientation marriage. That's it, but Jesus loves you. And it's like, really? Is that what Jesus wants me to do? So it's an interesting dynamic, but we'll see where it goes. I'm proud of him to being able to at least admit he went from a side X, which would be, you can't even call yourself gay, homosexual, nothing, bad, to, oh, okay, you might not have done anything, you're just struggling with this. So I'll take the little wins as they come.